Hello, my friends. Welcome once again to the Habitus. My name is Michael Pattison. I'm here with my co-host, Bobby Lowe. December is upon us somehow. Happy Advent. This episode, we're going to be discussing, following the successful template of the previous episode, 4 semi-randomly chosen films. They are in chronological order. Frank Capra's 1937 fantasy adventure drama, Lost Horizon. Richard Fleischer's 1971 true crime horror, 10 Rillington Place. Alfred Soule's 1976 religious slasher, Alice Sweet Alice, also known as Communion, and Stephen Sommers' 1998 action comedy horror, Deep Rising. Follow us on Twitter at habituspod, and you can also listen to us, if this is your kind of thing, on Stitcher and TuneIn now. So please do that if that is your thing. So, as I said, we begin with Lost Horizon.
Look at the world today. Is there anything more pitiful? What madness there is. What blindness. What unintelligent leadership. A scurrying mass of bewildered humanity crashing headlong against each other, propelled by an orgy of greed and brutality. The time must come, my friend, when this orgy will spend itself, when brutality and the lust for power must perish by its own sword. Against that time is why I avoided death and am here, and why you were brought here. For when that day comes, the world must begin to look for a new life. And it is our hope that they may find it here. For here we shall be, with their books and their music, and a way of life based on one simple rule. Be kind. When that day comes, it is our hope that the brotherly love of Shangri-La will spread throughout the world.
So Lost Horizon is an adaptation of English novelist James Hilton's 1933 novel of the same name. It features Ronald Colman as Robert Conway, who is about to become the British Foreign Secretary. It begins in 1935 in Baskul in China, where Conway is tasked with rescuing 90 white people from an incoming impending insurrection in China by the local rebels there. And they are on their way to Shanghai on a plane when they realise that their plane has been hijacked by somebody, some unknown character, mysterious character, who subsequently kind of collapses in the cockpit. That takes the plane down. Everyone survives, bar the pilot somehow, and they are rescued by a group of people who take them to a land called Shangri-La. That's the premise of the film. It's also kind of the synopsis. I don't really want to go into much more detail than that. Would you think that's kind of fair, Bobby? Or yeah, I mean, like, so okay, like Shangri-La turns out to be this like fantastical, wonderful place where everyone lives until they're, you know, hundreds of years old. Yeah. And gradually the group, Robert among them, of course, has become acquainted with the ways and customs of this community and want to leave, apart from Robert's brother George, who is resistant to the idea of staying, who believes they've been kidnapped, who they're being held against their will, and tensions arise accordingly.
Yeah.
Had you seen this film before I asked you to watch it for this episode?
No. What other Capra films have you seen?
I've seen Bitter Tears of General Yen with Barbara Stanwyck. I've seen It's a Wonderful Life, which was a film I was never able to connect with.
Really?
No, I've never been able to connect with it, and it's a film that I really, really want to connect with it. And
I love that film.
Maybe I'll watch it this month. You do?
Oh yeah, I've seen that, and I've seen It's a Wonderful Life. I think is great, and It Happened One Night is also great.
Right.
And then the other one I've seen is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Okay.
Which I remember being good.
Which is 2 years after this one. Yeah. Right,
and it's the one that this one most resembles in terms of being a kind of a polemical, discursive film. Like about in the case of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, it's like a State of the Nation kind of film. Right. And I mean, It's a Wonderful Life has that element as well, but it's a smaller element of that.
I've also seen 2 features that he made prior to the Hays Code coming in, which is the Forbidden, 1932, and The Miracle Woman, 1931. Which are both very, very good. They're the best films I've seen by him. And I've seen Prelude to War, his first entry into the Why We Fight series, which he made as World War Propaganda in 1942. Which again is very good. I remember being very good.
Are those 2 pre-code films violent?
I saw Forbidden in, I think, 2006 at the London Film Festival. And, I mean... They're not particularly violent. I mean, I remember, I think somebody gets shot on screen, and there's no, like, cutaway, nor is there any blood. But, yeah, I mean, they're not, like... But they're all definitely in a certain vein that is very different to the films that he was making towards the end of the late 30s onwards.
Right.
I must say, though, just funnily enough, I mean, I don't know why, but I hadn't watched it before watching it for this episode either. And I got up at 7 a.m. to watch it. I don't know why, but maybe it was delirium and maybe it was me being half asleep still. But on my notes here, I've written Lost Highway, which would be a very different viewing experience at 7 in the morning. And I must admit, going into it, this is kind of a shameful thing to admit. But I thought I was going to watch Billy Wilder's Lost Weekend with Ray Miller.
When you sent me the text with that title, that's what I thought as well. I thought, Lost Weekend. I had that recorded on TV, from TV on VHS years ago. But
the early scene here, when they're on the plane before they discover it's been hijacked, Robert Conway begins to drink, and one of his fellow travellers says, "Oh, there, you should be slowing down with the drink there, buddy." And I said, "Oh, here we go. Like this is like, this is the flight that leads him to. They're gonna crash, and it's gonna be a flight that leads him to become an alcoholic."
And I looked the film up before, but I didn't actually get into the film, still thinking it was the Billy Wilder film.
So, I had to readjust, as I said. So, I found this film quite long, I must say.
Apparently the original cut was 210 minutes.
Yeah, and much of it was believed lost until the 60s, and then there was a painstaking restoration. Sorry.
Yeah. So the version of this that I watched, I think that you watched the same, is the fully restored, or as close to as is likely to happen. With the complete soundtrack, but with some of the sections of image missing.
But for 7 minutes of footage. Yeah.
Right. So they've been replaced by production stills.
And it's really strange as well, because they're not like complete scenes that have gone missing. It's like snippets from.
There is one complete
otherwise intact scene.
There is one complete scene with the 2 kind of comedic characters interacting with the locals that goes on, and the whole scene is like it's one of these scenes where you're watching. It's like, there was probably the correct choice to cut this in the first place.
But then there's other scenes where halfway through the reverse shot sequence, it just like turns into stills, and you're like, well, how did that go? How did half of that scene go missing?
Yeah.
This is the first. I didn't know this, but this is Hilton's novel is the source, the origin of the term Shangri-La as a default reference to any sort of utopian community, and it's set in the Himalayas here. And it reminded me, actually. I didn't know, so when I'm watching it, it wasn't until after the film that I realised Shangri-La was, this is the source of that term. When I was watching it, I immediately thought, when they come upon the community and the town, and we see that establishing shot of this world of Rivendell in Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, etc., where, Elven, what's the character called again? Hugo Weaving.
Elrond.
Yeah.
Elrond Hubbard.
Yeah, Elrond and all his pals live for many, many hundreds of years. And this has a similar vibe to it. So, like, everything's pure. They emphasize the virtue of moderation. Like, nothing is, like, done in excess. Even to the point of virtue itself is emphasized in moderation. Like, and it's this, like, as I said, this sort of, utopian world. And, so the interest of the film is basically, like, finding out about this world. So we're very much in Conway's and his entourage's sort of mindset in terms of, like, where are we, what are we doing here, and then the gradual sort of process of falling in love with it, I guess. Helps that there's two beautiful women on site to assist the men's cause, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. So like I said, in relation to Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, this is another kind of discursive drama, but it leans much more heavily on its ideas than Mr. Smith does. Like, Mr. Smith has a really strong plot, with a lot of, like, momentum and conflict, and this is I don't know, this seems a little bit like Ideas in Search of a Story at times, where even the character development seems to function as a kind of proof of thesis, where you have, like, the characters are affected by Shangri-La in the way that the creators of Shangri-La hope people would be affected by it. As a sort of a, like, as I said, it's a kind of like a state of the world story. It deals with themes of, like, pacifism. The conflict that they flee at the beginning of the film is supposed to be the Chinese Civil War, I think. And they talk about, the Great Depression, and they talk about World War One, and also the looming war in Europe, the Second World War. So, like, they're what's his name?
Chang.
No, Conway is established at the beginning to be a pacifist. Chang and ultimately the High Lama, who is the kind of the secret kind of founder also of Shangri-La, a French missionary priest named Father Perrault. Who has the story is that he founded Shangri-La hundreds of years ago, and then it turns out that he's still alive because the lifestyle of Shangri-La, results in, very long lives. So you have, he comes across as some sort of mixture of, like, a utopian socialist, like a kind of a Robert Owen kind of figure, like a somebody who, like, founds a utopian community. But it's not like class struggle socialism. It's like a rich person who is creating a community and inviting everybody to live there.
Absolutely,
But a kind of a mixture between that and a kind of a Christian pacifist. Like, there's even, like, an apocalyptic kind of millenarianism to his thinking as well. It's like the world is going to hell, and, like, this place is like a cultural ark. It's, like, supposed to, protect all of mankind's achievements. A little bit like in Children of Men, the guy with all the artwork, he's protecting it from the collapse of civilization.
Right, I get, right. Yeah, Danny Houston living in Battersea Power Station, and that nihilistic thing of which Mark Fisher mentions, actually. I was just rereading Capitalist Realism recently, like, Clive Owen's character in that film says, what's all this for? In a few years' time, nobody's gonna, and he says something like, well, why not? It's just really nihilistic thing, like, because it has no value. Subsequently, there's a sagely smugness embodied in Chang, and I think that the High Lama as well. I'm not sure if we're meant to perceive them as such. But, like, later on, where, like, George makes his disdain for this whole thing as a sham clear, and I'm like, well, it's a pretty reasonable thing to think, like, just get out of there. I mean, it is interesting, like, the notion of which artifacts would be gathered for the preservation of, like, a sense of humankind against, doomed world or human destruction. Which examples of our culture would we want to sort of retain? But then, like, the obvious answer to that then is, like, well, everything. because culture is not hierarchical, or no, it shouldn't be. So you get this sort of Arnoldian sort of sense of subscription to culture. And actually, you mentioned like the community thing, but it's also like it's socialist, but it's socialism in one country in a way.
Yeah,
this is a very Stalinist film. I think
it's the utopian socialist thing of like you can just sort of almost like it's sort of inherited from the kind of the Platonic philosopher king kind of thing, where it's like what you really need is a ruler who is incredibly wise and kind. It's not it's like this society doesn't come out of social struggle. It comes out of the idea. It comes out of the heads of wise men.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's what ultimately strips the film of its dramatic interest for me for much of its running time, because this is it's a utopia that I don't connect with or relate to or even aspire to. It reminded me, of the line Colin Farrell says in The New World, this is the only truth, that was the only truth of something, that all else is unreal. And it reminded me also of David Walsh's of the World Socialist website at the time when he wrote about that film, just saying, but this Native American community, it embodies all of these utopian qualities to Farrell, but like, in the film itself, it doesn't really. I mean, I kind of disagree with what Walsh was saying, but it, even so, it reminded me when I was watching this film that this world is free of all contradiction, and like wouldn't these social mechanisms and the hierarchies that inevitably develop within that like make themselves manifest?
Well, see, that's the kind of the interesting thing about it, and the mixture of kind of the Christian ethic with the socialist sentiment, where it's like, I think the High Lama who says he actually invokes the meek shall inherit the earth. Yeah, right. So he
because he tasks he says to Conway, I'm going to die now, in that scene that resembles like Yoda dying in Empire. Spoiler alert. You're going to inherit this, and this is your mission. And yes, continue.
Sorry. So you have this notion of like, okay, so the philosopher king gifts this egalitarian society that's free of any kind of material want, because even on the plane on the way there, Conway is talking about. I think it is sorry, it's not Conway. It's Chang, when they get there, is talking about the origin of crime in lack. He says there is no crime without lack, which is like, again, sort of a historical materialist kind of approach to that question. So you have removed lack from the society, and people's innate goodness has been allowed to blossom. And like when I said this is like a discursive text, it's like it reminded me a little bit of. Did you ever read Brave New World? It's like from the same period. No. So it's like a science fiction, like future utopia with
I've seen Leonard Nimoy's adaptation of that.
Okay, a primitive person like brought into this society, and then he's the eyes through which we see the society.
Yeah,
which is a similar kind of setup here, or something like H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, where he goes to the future, but in both of those cases. Like in the Time Machine, before the time traveler discovers that these beautiful, free, happy people are actually like cattle for the people, the Morlocks who live underground. The Eloi are the food for the Morlocks. They're just being farmed on the surface. Before that, it's like they've just the absence of conflict from their lives has made them sort of atrophy and become like regress to a kind of like perpetual childlike state. They've like allowed their books to disintegrate, and they don't educate themselves and all that. And in Brave New World, it's the populace has to be kind of doped up with all these kind of they go to they don't watch movies, they watch feelies, and all that kind of stuff. But in this one, it's a much more sort of optimistic kind of vision of what would happen in such a society, because what actually does happen is they all start to pitch in, and it's like a realization of the communist ethic of from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. you know, and like that's what I said, where the character development sort of comes across as a proof of thesis. It doesn't seem to come from a place of like you know, real drama. It comes from a place of like, well, this is what needs to happen to make the argument that the film is trying to make.
Yeah.
And I agree.
The film is a sleek 80 minutes, can kind of be sort of tolerable and charming, I suppose.
Sure.
But at like 2 hours plus, it's like, are they going to stay here for the rest of the film? At what point does he become an alcoholic?
Because I do think that it does set up a kind of an interesting mystery. With the society that's too good to be true, and the people who are suspicious of like, well, who's really running the society, and that's the aspect of it that reminded me of the Time Machine. Yeah, because that's the same kind of register that the Time Machine is written in when he first arrives there. You know, he sees these people and they're like frolicking and they seem to be free and happy and completely without kind of fear or stress or anything like that. And then he discovers the horrible truth beneath the appearance of utopia.
Yeah.
That doesn't really happen here. And I mean, there's a romantic subplot that I think the film completely flatlines whenever it cuts to it. His relationship with Sandra, the woman he meets there, who is kind of like a mouthpiece for the values of the community. Yeah, and I mean they only. I'm getting the feeling that you liked this less than I did. I actually quite enjoyed it.
I did enjoy it, but like I enjoyed the process of figuring it out. So let me just backtrack a moment, because I said I've seen Leonard Nimoy's adaptation of Brave New World, right? And I just want to make it clear for all those Brave New World Aldous Huxley aficionados out there listening that it's actually the 1998 TV adaptation I'm referring to is Leslie Libman's and Larry Williams' adaptation, in which Leonard Nimoy appears alongside Peter Gallagher.
Right, so it wasn't Leonard Nimoy's directorial follow-up to 3 Men and a Baby?
It was not, no,
okay.
Sorry. Sorry to get everyone excited there. But I did enjoy the process of figuring this film out, because I didn't really know where it was going. I think it belatedly advances something resembling an ambiguity and an ambivalence towards its subject matter. Yeah. I'm still trying to figure out if I'd be interested in reading Hilton's novel, because I imagine that, you know, the source material is able to go into sort of more detail about the nuances about the society. Then again, written in 1933, who knows? Like, what I was going to ask, so we've got another character, Maria.
I was just about to bring her up.
Yeah,
she's she's like a complicating element to the story.
She is,
because
belatedly,
yeah. That's she's not like, it is oddly paced in that regard. Like, it's almost like it is leaning too heavily on kind of an assumed sense of kind of like wonder and mystery, which is there initially, but then it spends a lot of time in a very kind of discursive mode, exploring these ideas and kind of establishing that the Lost Horizon is kind of the promise of capitalism, or the promise of liberalism, and instead of the kind of the promised utopia or the promised kind of techno utopia of the 19th century. We ended up in the period in which this novel and film were produced, with depression and war and instability, World War I looming, Second World War, and so on.
So Maria's another woman who lives in this community and has done for many, many, many years. And she's the romantic interest to Conway's younger brother, George, played by John Howard. And so later on, it turns out she's really determined to leave with George. And George obviously wants his brother, Robert, to come with him. And Maria, you know, reveals that she's being held there against her will, and like she can't wait to leave. And then this is where it gets really interesting, because they do leave with some merchants, and they're being taken across the mountains, the Himalayas. And you know, she's warned that if she leaves, she's going to
so she's told by Chang, Robert is told by Chang that Maria is actually he says that she came there, she's meant to be like in her mid-60s, whereas she appears to be like 20, and that's the really interesting thing to me, is that she says that she's 20. She says no, that's just a lie. Of course, like, do I look like a 65-year-old
And at
woman?
that point, I think I'm feeling a little claustrophobic as a viewer in this place as well, and I'm kind of, oh, well, this is obviously, like, this is where it's revealed that it's all a big sham, and, like, it's just like a, like a sexually predatory community or whatever else.
Yeah.
And,
not a
George is gonna, take Maria away, and it's all going to be great. But then, like, she does, like, against the harsh elements of the outside world, they look at her and she has turned into a 60-year-old woman again.
Yeah.
And then, like, and then the film has this sort of weird rambling coda in which, Robert is, George falls to his death, and Robert is in search of the lost horizon, I guess, and wants to return. But we only ever really hear about this through the hearsay of other characters, just like, explaining, like, what happened, like. Well, with incredulity.
That's the thing. So he finds his way back to civilization, and then when he's well enough again, he like escapes, and like he's supposed to be brought back to England, and he keeps on escaping and stuff. But we get this whole story, with these like politicians or diplomats or whatever meeting in a restaurant, talking about, or in a bar talking about this kind of crazy story of Robert Conway, and the guys telling the story was tracking Conway for months and months and months, and he kept on skipping, like hopping ships and going to different ports, and just slipping through the net, and I loved that idea of Conway disappearing into legend, you know. But then we get a final scene where he returns to Shangri-La, which I thought was a mistake. I thought that was an unfortunate choice, because I really, really love the idea of ending the film with just the relaying of this legendary story.
I mean, is it at all valid to interpret it as, like, his sort of imagination, or like
Sure, but you still see him though, even if Shangri-La is his imagination.
Yeah,
you still see him on the. I kind of like the idea of not seeing him again.
Yeah, and I liked also that weird change in pace. So, like, the sense of time that we spend in the community in Shangri-La itself is, like, weirdly, like, timeless in a way. And then as soon as he gets to the outside world, it's like, oh, he's been followed, as you said, like, the other characters are saying, oh, we've been following him for, like, months, like, and it's like, it's only, like, one scene, one sequence.
Yeah.
I like those kinds of structural shifts, because it enforces a certain mode of viewing onto me, where I'm kind of trying to, as I said, actively trying to figure it out and aware of that. But I just thought it doesn't advance its critique in any as interesting a way as it could. I do think it has redeeming qualities, but I think the dramatic elements of it are kind of just redundant and non-existent for me.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I like the fact that the two brothers are kind of driven apart to a certain extent by their encounters with two different women who have different attitudes towards the community, is promising, but it's resolved too quickly.
Yeah.
And also, I don't understand the Maria thing, because why does she not know that she's a 65-year-old woman?
Yeah, I mean, like, so is there an element of brainwash there? Like, I don't know. Like,
is there? Yeah, it's a very ambiguous, but it doesn't feel purposefully ambiguous. It feels like there's something missing. Like, why does she want to leave? Why does she not know her age? She's the only example of a person in that community who is behaving the way that she is.
Yeah. No, it's true. I think that's a source of genuine intrigue for me, though, in the film, but I'm just not sure that the film's, like, aware of it being a source of intrigue.
Right, that's what I'm saying as well, that it seems to be underwritten, or maybe it was there in the 210-minute cut.
Yeah, which you'll be actively pursuing now, like Robert pursues Shangri-La, right?
Yeah, just disappear into legend.
Yeah. Just never heard of again after.
Yeah. It's a very beautifully shot film, I thought, as well. Like, there are a lot of very beautiful compositions in Shangri-La, and then I think it's all archival imagery. There's really stark, like, wilderness imagery once they actually leave Shangri-La. I mean, like, it's, as I said, it's a film about ideas first, and it's a state of the world kind of contemplation. And I think a similar film of 2017 I would find kind of off-putting, but I like these kinds of films from the past because they're like little ideological time capsules. Yeah. And it's like, this is the same reason that I like Brave New World, even though a lot of people don't like it because it's so didactic.
Right.
But I like that kind of little window into, like, these were the conversations around kind of like society and
so they're
culture at the time.
Inevitably interesting as sort of artifacts, right? As sort of
Yeah.
primary sources of the discourse surrounding a historic world event, I guess. Have you seen the remake directed by Charles Jarrett, which was made in 1973? It's actually a musical.
Right. I read about it.
By
Yeah.
Larry Kramer. I haven't seen it, but I'd be interested to see it as a musical, like how it's done, because I like musicals. I think there's potential there. And apparently it's more of an adaptation than a remake. Strangely enough.
Okay. An adaptation of the film, or an adaptation of the novel?
Of the novel, rather than a remake of the film.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
So final thoughts on this? I mean,
I thought overall it was interesting, primarily on the grounds of being the kind of a window into the period in which it was made.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
Yeah,
I mean,
I enjoyed it. It's the weakest of the 4 Capra films that I've seen, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say it is mine also, but that's to give benefit of the doubt to It's a Wonderful Life, which I should watch this month at some point.
Right. Okay.
So that brings us to 10 Rillington Place.
Did you get the doctor? Doctors can't do much now, I'm afraid, Tim.
Oh, we got to do something. The police or something.
Yes, you may be right.
Well, that's what I think, anyhow.
It'll be criminal manslaughter for me, of course.
Oh, God, I don't want to get you into trouble, Mr. Christie.
No, I'm not just thinking about me so much. I'm not the only one involved. You knew all about it, didn't you?
Of course I knew about it.
Well, don't get huffy with me, my lad. You knew about it, that's the point. You're an accessory before the act.
I done nothing. Oh, God, I done nothing.
But you knew about it, Tim. You consented. That's all they want to know.
All right then. I'll not tell them nothing. I'll just say I don't know nothing and just keep climbed up.
You better go and see to the baby. You can't leave her crying like that. Poor old Timmy. I could get you out of this if only you didn't keep talking so silly.
I just don't know what to do.
Well, we could keep quiet about it, couldn't we?
Dude, she's just lying there.
Well, there are ways of disposing of bodies.
What? Not be buried, you mean? No proper service?
What good would a proper service do?
Well, she'd want it as well. And me too, I want it.
You want it, she'd want it. You want to be home. Is that what you want?
Okay, so Richard Fleischer's 10 Rillington Place, which was released in 1971, stars Richard Attenborough as Reginald Christie, a real-life serial killer. It begins in London, 1944. It's named after a Notting Hill residential terrace, since demolished. And it proceeds through a decade or so in which Reginald, the resident of 10 Rillington Place, or one resident, he murders several people. He killed at least 8 people in real life. The novel is adapted by Clive Exton from the book of the same name by Ludovic Kennedy. who I think also is credited as, I think, a technical advisor on this film. And the major sort of section of the film is taken up by Christie's relationship to two tenants in 10 Rillington Place. They are Timothy and Beryl Evans, played respectively by John Hurt and Judy Geeson. And this is a film very much rooted in the real-life miscarriage of justice dished out to Timothy Evans, who was hanged. He was executed wrongfully for the murder of his wife and child, who were two of Christie's victims. I'd seen this film before, Bobby, many, many years ago. I say many, many years ago. Let's just say several years ago. I don't want to seem older than I am. And I watched it actually as recently as January this year when Indicator, the home entertainment distributor label in the UK, they released it on dual format in a really nice reissue. I had always forgotten how episodic it is. And it always, when I remember the film, I always think, yeah, I like that, but I don't really want to watch it again. So when you asked me to watch this again for this episode, you know, it's a film that I remember for things that I'm sorry, when I rewatch it, I'm always surprised by how I remember it for certain things and not for others. So, like, you know, the tone and feel of it and the episodic nature of it, I always kind of forget that. And I always remember it for that, like, you know, the horrific court sequence in which, you know, Timothy actually goes down for the murder of his wife and child. But it is, before I develop any further thoughts relating to that, this is a film that you very much appreciate, right?
I love this film, yeah.
Yeah. Would you class it as a horror? Because I said at the outset of the episode that it kind of is. It's a true crime horror. Would you say it is? As a horror fan?
Kind of. I mean, you could draw comparisons to, say, we talked about this on a previous episode, but the Ed Gein alike, Deranged, from a couple years later, or maybe like Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. Like, these are stories about serial killers that are. I mean, in the case of Deranged, in the case of Henry, they're, you know, very loosely based. Well, sorry, actually, they're very closely based on the lives of Ed Gein and Henry Lee Lucas, but they're not supposed to be those particular people. This has more of a kind of a docudrama quality where they're sticking to the true events, and I don't think that it doesn't, because of that. I think it doesn't come across as horror, if you know what I mean. It feels, because it's denouement is predetermined. No, it's more the kind of the tone of it, I suppose. It feels very kind of like, I don't know, very kind of plainly stated or something like that. It doesn't feel kind of lurid or sensationalized in the way that something like Deranged does or Henry.
Right.
But I mean, I wouldn't really contest its classification as horror either.
Sure.
I mean, I'm sure that, like, the treatment of this kind of subject matter, and actually I would say that the reason that I love the film so much has less to do with its kind of a political interventionist kind of quality. This was like a very conscious intervention on the part of Richard Fleischer and also Richard Attenborough in the debate around capital punishment that was going on at the time. It had been abolished a few years previously, and there was question of bringing it back, and they wanted to put back in people's minds this, like, horrendous miscarriage of justice.
Yeah.
That is, I enjoy the whole film, and I enjoy that side of it as well, and it is horrifying, but for me it's much more the kind of the close quarters time spent with Christie in his house doing what he does that I find so kind of compelling.
It's an emotional horror for me as well, because the true events, I hate that phrase, but the real life roots, the source of this material,
the historical aspect of it,
and almost like, because it reminds us at the outset of the film that where possible, dialogue has been lifted from actual documents.
Right. That's why I think it has this kind of docudrama feel where they've, as insofar as is possible, they've stuck. I mean,
obviously, obviously the dramatization of events within 10 Rillington Place as a house can't be
obviously a certain degree of dramatic license.
Obviously, like the court case is obviously very much verbatim.
Yeah.
And the reason I call it an emotional horror, because Timothy, as embodied by Hurt, his vulnerability and like that awful, horrible miscarriage of justice at the centre of the film is kind of heartbreaking, right? And it's a really, really terrific performance by the late and very great John Hurt.
Everybody is so great in this. All of the performances are incredible.
I mean, like, so it begins with an air raid siren, and, you know, we're told that it's London 1944, and it's very much rooted in the historical fabric and everyday workings of wartime London, wartime Britain, and it pays much attention to the fact that it's not interested in psychologizing the crimes or in kind of humanizing or dehumanizing. Well, we get back to that about the dehumanizing aspects of the depiction of Christie, but it's very much nuanced in its depiction of like how these crimes are contingent on many sort of interconnected, historically specific things.
Yeah.
So like disparities in education and wealth, ignorance with regard to medicine, which was widespread then, et cetera, et cetera.
And
like
the inaccessibility of abortion in a legal context as well.
Wartime rationing, even, you know, like and also obviously ultimately the forensics as well that prevent the victims being, you know, properly medically examined, and the lack of DNA tests that would have been able to, you know, tell us.
And even just like basic like investigative incompetence, like that they didn't even really. I mean, how could you fail? Like when you see toward the end of the film, like where the bodies are hidden and all that kind of thing. Like, how could you fail to find them? You know.
So which is very much rooted in actually the I suppose the state of housing as well in London. You know, those terraced Victorian houses.
Is Notting Hill a sequel to this?
And the school. I don't recall, actually. I need to look that one up. And the house itself, like, it's such a. I mean, the cinematography, like, there's a dankness that seems to be creeping in at the very edges of each composition. Like, it just feels like really sort of run down, and we get a real sense of the squalor in which these people are forced to live, including Christie himself. Like, Christie's like, you know, like a very poor guy, we get, right? And yet
he owns the house, right?
Yeah.
And he's renting out the 2 upper floors.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he does have, he's obviously like his class position is certainly different from. We never meet the guy. What's his name? Who lives on the 2nd floor? He's just in the hospital at the beginning, and I presume he dies, I guess, in the course of the film.
Yeah. So one of the things I love about it, we mentioned in the last film, Lost Horizon, like its unusual structure. This is very unusual in structure as well. I mean, you can understand it because it becomes a film about miscarriage of justice. The time and portion of the film dedicated to the relationship between Timothy and development of his character, and Beryl's relationship to Christie, and that becomes the eventual thrust of the movie. I'm going to read here, if you indulge me, kind of a long quotation from a passage from the booklet essay that came with the Indicator release I just mentioned, written by Thurza Wakefield, a critic and PhD researcher based in Nottingham. She positions the film within the genre of like sort of, you know, serial killer cinema, and also to come back to this sense of dehumanizing Christie or othering Christie as a murderer, serial killer. It goes on for a bit, so I'll try and be as articulate as possible. Albert Settle, in his excellent book Serial Killer Cinema, finds prototypes of the serial killer character in vampire movies, mad doctor films, monster movies, werewolf movies, killer ape movies, and they are the ghosts of most of these in Rillington Place. Twice, Christie's silhouette, Nosferatu-esque, announces his entrance into the Evans' bedroom, where inside lies the dead Beryl Evans, her husband standing over her, incredulous. The iron foundry chimney at the dead end of the street recalls the tall architectural forms of German expressionist cinema. The coarse plasterwork of the walls at number 10, its painted canvas sets. Hunkered over the bundle he means to stow in the wash-house, Christie looks ape-like a gorilla, knuckle-walking when he leans his weight on his fist for leverage as he reaches for his wife's body, shrouded in eiderdown, then heaves it toward him and beneath the floorboards. And of course there are the prosthetics, the false bald pate that cannot but attract our notice, and puts one in mind of phrenology. The real Christie was bald, yes, but his baldness wasn't the defining feature it becomes for Richard Attenborough, the crown built up Beline-like. Why must the actor have worn another head? Does changing his appearance not revive the Victorian opinion that physical difference is index of murderous behaviour, and so belie Fleischer's way of thinking? John Hurt endured no transformation that he might closer resemble his counterpart, but then Evans was not a killer, so he hadn't to fill the role. And this is where it comes into, I think, the unusual structure of the film. How then to explain this othering of Christie? Perhaps Fleischer saw nothing in it. This is a movie, after all. Perhaps he felt that the film's prevailing realism and the authenticity of its locations would overbalance the fantasies he gestured toward. The spells of Nosferatu, Frankenstein, and King Kong must surely be broken in this plodding post-war context. Would not hold up beside Fry's balsam and the modified mason jar and lumbago and the paucity of light. I'll cut forward. Possibly these illusions were sent to try us. Was it Fleischer's hope that we can test them? The idea being that the viewer might arrive at a sturdier sense of right if she first grappled with these invitations to find Christie inhuman and beyond the pale of empathy. And then cutting forward again. So perhaps it was rather that it didn't much matter how Christie came across, of whom or what he reminded the audience, because what horrifies about the story isn't so much Christie as it's Evans. It's in Evans that Fleischer locates the real fear, in the living victim while he lives and his tormenting. Which is, I think, gets the crux.
Can you repeat that?
Which gets to the crux, I think, of this film having a dual element of horror. So the true crime horror and the emotional horror.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I mean, Hurt's performance, Christie done it. His gradual tormented realization of what's happening and the power mechanics that are in play, and how they're rooted in class disdain and notions of hierarchy that are rooted in class, I think, and in education. It's established early on that he can't read. And I think part of the power of his performance and his depiction of his character is the fact that it's in moments quite unsympathetic to him and the milieu that he's representative of. Yeah. So that sequence in which, he has a blazing row with Beryl, because she's invited a pal over whose presence he doesn't like. He goes out on a bender with his pals, and it cuts to the bar, and he's being very kind of macho and feigning this
self-aggrandizing,
kind of absolute sexual sort of thrust in relationship that he's going to have with this third entity, which is at complete odds with the living situation at home. It's just couldn't be further from the truth. And I think I love that the film includes those. It's not like he's not this beautiful, wonderful guy, it's very much sort of, I don't know, embedded within the brutality of the culture.
Yeah, I mean, the hanging scene is just brutal. Like, I just wince with pity. But I do even for the guilty when it comes to capital punishment.
Oh yeah, well, so on our second episode, way back in the summer, you mentioned that you hadn't seen a short film about killing. Have you since seen it or not?
No.
The Kozlovsky film. Oh. So you need to see it because...
Publicly shamed again.
Because this scene... This scene very much anticipates a scene in that film as well.
Right.
But it's a very, very different emotional circumstance in which we're watching somebody be hanged.
Mm-hmm. So I'm getting the impression that you're drawn more to the miscarriage of justice side of the story.
I'm not sure if I'm drawn to it more. It's definitely the one thing I remember about the film between viewings more. And like, as I said, it's just such a weird structure. Like, this is how long is the film? Like 110 minutes, 111 minutes.
Yeah,
Which it always, when I'm told that or when I'm reminded of it, I'm thinking no, because this material doesn't sustain, like, it doesn't warrant 111 minutes. Like, it's just such a weird, like, I never, when I'm watching the film, when I commit to a viewing of it, I'm never like, oh, hurry up, you know, like, I love the film. It's just, I think its pacing is unusual, which isn't a criticism. I mean, like, you know, so the first scene, like, when Christie kills his first on-screen victim anyway, Muralini's neighbor. And it's like, I'm always surprised by like how rapid the progressions are. Like the ellipses, it's like it cuts forward and then
cuts forward 5 years.
And then like so that like
that's 1944.
Got,
exactly. So it's in the middle of that opening scene is, as you mentioned, you hear the air raid siren. So it's 1944, and then after her death, he buries her in the garden, right? And then it cuts forward 5 years.
Yeah, and then we get the zoom into Flat to Let, which is a nice economic bit of visual information. And then like Timothy and Beryl are like, we've come to see about the flat. And I love like the way Richard Attenborough just like delivers the line, to see it. Like, you know, like he's advertising a flat to let, and he's like almost taken aback by the fact that they would even want to come and like see him and put them. It's almost as if like, why would you even put yourselves in that kind of dangerous position? Don't you know who I am? It's like, because there's this weird, like, I said it doesn't really psychologize him, but in a way it kind of does push towards doing so, although it obviously doesn't provide any easy resolutions or answers as to why.
I think it's quite psychological. I think it's quite a psychological portrayal.
It, like, he's got like weird complexes about him, though, right? Like,
well, I mean, that's the understatement of all time.
I mean, yeah. I mean, in addition to the fact that he's like, you know, murdering these people, but, like, so, and I think it's revealed more than anything else in the scene towards the end when he's been reduced to poverty and he's living in some kind of communal living thing.
Yeah, it's like he's in like a homeless shelter, and he's bragging to this other guy who couldn't care less.
Yeah, and he says, you know, I was once a policeman, you know. And like, as he has done throughout the film, he relies on other people's deferral to authority, which I guess is another way of encapsulating the culture of the time. Like, so, you know, medical authorities, police authorities, and to criminal justice and whatnot.
And also to the authority of a landlord also.
Absolutely. And because he's in an otherwise very lowly, kind of pathetic, he's in a lowly position, and he's a very pathetic figure. He's a very pathetic guy. Other than being creepy and whatever else. And so he relies on that for his own sort of daily self-aggrandizement. And then I love it when the other guy to whom he's mentioning the fact that, you know, I used to be in the police force, just goes, pig, and just turns around, you know.
Like, well, if you're going to be like that, then. Of course, it's what I'd expect.
Yeah. So that's what I mean when I mention that first scene between Beryl and Timothy arriving at the house and him just being like, oh my God, why would you even want to come here? Like, don't you know what I'm capable of? You know, it's it's weird. Like, do you think it's like a push to say he's even like, I said he's pathetic and pitiable. I mean, like, I know we're certainly not invited to sort of empathize with Christian anyway, but do you find him like, in any way sort of, I don't know, like, I don't know.
So are you asking if he's sympathetic?
Finish the sentence for me.
I don't find him sympathetic.
No, I don't. I know.
I mean, like, but
inviting us to, but at the same time, it's like he's such a fascinatingly rendered character.
Yeah,
that is very much far from like the empowered murderer. Like,
right, that's what I was going to say.
His social circumstance, I guess.
He's the absolute opposite end of the spectrum from Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah,
you know, he's sad and pathetic, and like his actions have this like meaninglessness to them, like this just pathetic meaninglessness. That's the thing that I love about the film. So I love that like, you know, extreme close up of Christie and his life and his, like, it's disgusting and stomach turning
and do you think there's a moment in a lot of certainly in the Muriel Eady murder, the first one that we watch, do you think there's a moment where, like, he doesn't know if it's not predetermined, the death, he hasn't decided that he's going to kill them, and it's almost like he wants them to sort of struggle so that it kind of justifies his reaction. A bit like, like a bit like a more, I don't know, like how to put this, bit of a more like a conscious, more active version of Lenny in of Mice and Men, like where Lenny kills Curly's wife only because, like, not without meaning to, obviously, like only because like he panics when she starts to struggle, and he inadvertently kills her due to his strength. Obviously, this is a very, very different version of that, but it's like, I'm not for a minute suggesting that he didn't mean to kill these people, but it's like the film, I think, leaves it open. Like there's that moment, very, very difficult to discern, but there's that moment where like, oh, that could have gone another way.
Right.
I
don't know. I
find it very powerful.
I think they're relatively premeditated. I mean, like, when he very carefully plans to kill Beryl, he makes sure that Tim is out of the house. He makes sure that he sends his wife away. He feigns back pain and says that he can't go to work today, and he sends his wife into his workplace to deliver documents that he says that they'll need. So he knows how long she'll be gone.
Yeah, and he makes Timothy aware of, like, the likelihood of death. Like,
right, yeah, the 1 in 10. Yeah. And then he's interrupted by two workmen who have been sent to repair they're repairing something in the backyard.
Yeah.
But he goes through with it anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, because he realizes that he's probably not going to get another chance.
Maybe it's just me as a viewer so heavily invested in the miscarriage of justice, sort of like willing those moments not to happen. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and it every time I watch it, I'm like, oh, that's the moment where like it could have gone the other way, but it hasn't. Oh well, and it's got this horrible sense of inevitability, like that is just so written into its very fabric.
Yeah. I find this portrayal of the character so disturbing. I mean, like after he kills Beryl, and his manipulative conversation with Tim.
Yeah, that's
like is really stomach turning. Like, and he talks about like how he's gonna like where he's gonna put her body, and he's gonna put her down the sewer, and it's like he's like flushing her down the toilet, like it's like she's just trashed, like the throwaway.
Yeah. And also what makes that doubly horrible is the emerging emotional horror that I referred to, of like, the shots of John Hurt kind of, going through the practicalities and rationale in his head, and you can see it, like a visibly wretched torment on his face of like accepting it, because that's, as we said, the deferral to authority, because like Christie as an authority, as a landlord, frightens him with the threat of another authority, the police.
Yeah, but he also appeals to his own medical authority and his own history as a police officer. He knows the law, and this is what'll happen, and this is who they'll believe. And then when he thinks that Tim is actually going to defy him, then he actually threatens him.
Yeah,
and says, well, you go to the police, then go on. Who do you think they're going to believe?
And it's that horrible cut between. You never guess what he's done. He's, when he was telling his wife, Christie's telling his wife that Timothy's fled and that he's killed his child. Of course,
killed the baby.
Different. Yeah. And then it cuts to Timothy having handed himself into the cops and saying,
no, he goes to another town and he visits his aunt and uncle. And he has a cover story.
Okay, we don't cut then direct, but then when Timothy's asking about his kid to the cops after he's...
on the train when they're taking him back,
Oh my God, it's absolutely disgusting and awful. And
it's really disturbing stuff.
Yeah.
But a big part of it, though, is... I agree with everything you're saying about that side of the story. It's really disturbing and tragic, but the way that he just like there's something about the I think we spoke about this on when we were talking about angst on the second episode, but that the just like meaninglessness of his actions, that he's just like so beholden to his own impulses that he is like meticulously planning how he can like satisfy himself with, and like the just like absolute amorality of it, and just using this, like the absolute objectification of these people, and the way that he uses them, and then just like disposes of them like they're garbage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that like I'm just generally talking about like what a serial killer does, but that's why it's so interesting to me. And then the depiction of this space that he lives in, and I think I mentioned this in relation to something like Deranged as well. This like where like he's making furniture out of the bodies and all that kind of stuff, but like the space as like an externalization of his own mind, and like the ghosts of the people that he's disposed of,
which I think comes back to the German expressionism stuff that Theodore Wakefield referred to in her essay, like, as like the Caligari house of like the world sort of beginning to resemble the internal conflicts of its inhabitants.
Yeah. Like he has bodies buried in the garden. He has bodies concealed beside the washing machine in the utility shed. He has bodies under the floorboards. He has bodies in the concealed alcove in the kitchen.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And like I was reading that we don't actually see this depicted in the film, but we do see the dog digging in the back garden.
Yeah, it's very Rear Window.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, he apparently a bone, like a femur, I think, was dug up, and he didn't hide it. He just used it to prop up a sagging fence post in the garden, and it was there for years. A human femur, which is amazing to think that the police investigated and this bone was just there in plain sight. But anyway,
and do you think that's like an arrogance on his part? That like,
yeah,
it is a knowledge that it won't be investigated, or do you think it's just like a complete pathetic like naivety on his part, or what? Like,
no, I think. I mean, he's like, based on his depiction in this film, he's like extremely arrogant in the way that serial killers often are.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like I think that the way Fleischer directed as well. I think that I said at the beginning that I wouldn't necessarily classify it as horror. I'm kind of talking myself out of that position right now, but what I was saying was that Fleischer's approach to the material has this kind of docudrama element that is not sensationalized enough to feel like it's going for horror,
which I think underlines what you just said about him being such a pathetic embodiment of what a serial killer is. Like even the end, like that, there's no like sensational dramatic chase or like him trying to elude the authorities, which might have dragged the filmmaker into inviting us to kind of identify with his escape or would-be escape, or the mechanisms of his escape. And it
doesn't feel.
It just comes to nothing.
Even more so than it doesn't feel like horror. It doesn't feel like a thriller either.
No, definitely not.
But but Fleischer's like that sort of blunt, matter of fact, kind of plain approach to the imagery. I mean, when the new people move into 10 Rillington Place and they scratch away at the wallpaper and they say that there's a smell. And he gets the torch and he looks into the alcove, and then there are these three women's bodies, just like, I mean, they're like almost in the fetal position in this place, and it's just like the loneliest, emptiest, most meaningless image.
I mean,
like I don't know. I think it's really, really haunting and disturbing.
I have periodic jumps down the rabbit hole at 5 a.m. Every other year or so, where I end up reading for some reason like the Wikipedia entries on like people like Fred West,
right?
Stuff like that, and just like reading the accounts of even survivors who have gone through to a certain point what others have gone through, and it's just like it's unfathomable and unthinkable. And watching a film like 10 Rillington Place is a profound emotional experience.
I think so, and I think it's a different, like, it's not. I said in relation to something like Angst and that sequence in the underpass, and how it kind of conveys to me like a sort of a truth about like the fragility and the kind of the kind of the meaninglessness of existence in general, but this one doesn't have.
It took you 7 episodes to get to it.
But the 10 Rillington Place doesn't have a single scene that stands out like that conveys that sentiment so forcefully. It has a sort of a more of a cumulative kind of gnawing quality, where you're spending so much time with Christie and in his little squalid space that kind of starts to feel like an externalization of his own mind. that it starts to kind of take on a sort of microcosmic significance, where it's like the meaninglessness and the emptiness and the pitilessness of his actions. They sort of repercussively start to color everything else in the story for me, and it starts to kind of underline the just general meaninglessness of, you know, life and death, and like his like work and his relationships and his marriage, and like his wife is such a fascinating character as well. And
yeah,
like,
those
also like
sequence...
even the jump to like the passage of time and everything. It's a really...
Yeah, I know what you mean. Just to say about the depiction of the wife, which I agree with. There's that. So when the cops are searching the outhouse, on the assumption that these are the victims of Timothy, we've got that sequence of reaction shots, reverse shot of like the wife kind of. Do you think she's already aware of things happening? One of my favorite scenes.
One of my favorite scenes is after.
This isn't Tim's doing.
Yeah.
And then it cuts to Christy, and he sort of realizes that she realizes.
Wait, what scene are you talking about? You're talking about the scene.
So when the cops are like finding, hold on, there's another one here, and like to find the body of Beryl and the child, the baby.
Well, do you think that she knows that early? See, that's the interesting question to me, because
I think that it certainly is.
I think that when she finally realizes what's going on, she also must realize that deep down she knew it all along.
Yeah,
or that she has known it for a long time and disavowed it, because, you know, you do get a close up of her in court, and while Christie is giving his testimony, and this is before Tim is executed. Yeah. But the lawyer is like, the barrister is like, he's kind of, you know, he's cross-examining Christie, and like the holes in his story are becoming very apparent to her, to Ethel, and then there's a scene of them at home, and
where she's going to rush out.
She says, we don't have friends. We don't go. She says she's going to go and visit with her sister or something like that. And she says, we don't have any friends. We never go out. You don't work. And he says, well, I can't work, can I? I should be in the hospital. And she says, I know where you should be.
Yeah.
I know where you should be.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh. And she's still in the house with him, and he knows, and he knows that she knows. And then sure enough, we don't see the murder, but we see him disposing of her body.
Yeah.
We see him. He goes to the medicine cabinet for his medication, doesn't he? And then he sees the rope and his instruments of murder. And we just cut to him pulling up the floorboards and disposing of her body.
Yeah.
It's so dark. It's like so disturbing. And and it's the overriding sense of like utter emptiness and meaninglessness to the whole thing that I find so affecting.
I mean, I don't know if you have anything of note to say about it, but I was going to kind of wrap this section up by asking, like, do you find, so Christie's psychology, if you like, has pervaded the mise-en-scène of the film itself. Do you think, like, the film lingers in such a way after viewing in that, like, sort of counteracts Fleischer's attempt to sort of cut it off from history? So, like, it's wrapped up with, like, what I mean by that, hold on, sorry. What I mean by that is we get on-screen inscriptions that inform us that, you know, after the fact, when Christie was hanged and, you know, Timothy was, you know, buried on consecrated ground outside of the prison where he was buried, his remains were moved, and, like, you know, he was, like, posthumously, you know, exempted from the crime. Is that, do you think, intended to sort of resolve this film or make us feel any more comfortable about what's, you know, happened? Because you mentioned this film as being sort of like a justice crusade.
Yeah.
Because I don't feel comfortable by it. Like, I do feel like, this is like, I don't feel like, well, that was the war and that thing doesn't happen anymore. Although it's very, very historically set, it very much makes me feel very uncomfortable. And disturbs me way beyond the parameters of the film and its world. Like,
that's the thing about it, is that it takes the universal truth that everybody has a private life and a private space where they live their life and an inner life that they don't ever share with anyone completely. And not because it's like an incriminating thing. It's just because nobody would ever want to hear every single thought that's in your head. So everybody has a private inner life. Yeah. And then it just extrapolates that into like a very particular set of circumstances where that private life, that inner life, is completely unacceptable in any kind of social context. And it's just like, I don't know, like how do you, like you kind of cut yourself off before you asked if I found the character sympathetic or but I can't even like wrap my head around how you could regard other people the way that these people do, and like how you could regard somebody as an object in that way, to be used and then disposed of and just forgotten about, and like but like, how do they live in a house that has dead bodies in the walls? It just like, because I know that he has necrophilic tendencies, you see that as well, but
I know. It's all a bit fucked up.
It is, yes. Actually, so Richard Fleischer was one of the first names that came to mind for me when we were first talking about the Journeyman series.
Okay.
Because, I mean, he really is the ultimate journeyman director, you know. But, 46 films. Yeah. So, you know.
Yeah, maybe
we'll
when we're
tackle him after Sidney Lumet.
50th anniversary edition. We can do him, and then we can do Sidney Lumet. Okay, so that was 10 Rillington Place. I think we're both agreed that it's a masterpiece.
Yeah, I love it.
Which brings us to 1976's Alice, Sweet Alice.
Annie. What happened? Jim. Oh, Jimmy. Annie, I was so worried. Somebody called and said somebody tried to kill you.
Oh, my God, Jimmy, it was awful. She stabbed my leg.
Who, Annie? Who?
Annie, don't. She tried to kill me. Oh, my God, I don't believe it. Annie, shut up.
Kay, for Christ's sake, let her talk. All right, what's going on here?
She's like my own. I love her, Catherine. You hate her because you knew I was pregnant when I got married. That's not true. I love Alice. May God strike me dead if I'm lying.
Annie, don't. You realize what you're saying?
It was Alice. It was Alice. Liar! Liar! You're all liars! I'm not lying! I'm not lying! You want to believe it was her?
Okay, so the third film that we're going to talk about on this episode is the 1976 horror thriller Alice, Sweet Alice, which was originally titled Communion when it premiered in 1976 at the Chicago International Film Festival, and then was retitled Alice, Sweet Alice for its 1978 release. It was also re-released a second time, or released for a third time, under the title Holy Terror in 1981 to cash in on the early 80s slasher boom. This is the story of a young girl named Alice and her younger sister named
Karen,
of whom she is jealous, and Karen ends up getting murdered, and Alice is the main suspect. That's about it, really, for the setup, isn't it?
That's it. It's a thin premise. Hadn't seen this film before, had you?
No.
Was it on your radar even as a horror?
Yeah. It shows up in lists. You know, once you've kind of made your way through all the more sort of high profile ones, it's one of the more kind of acclaimed films that you can. Yeah. You'll see it pop up on lists.
Didn't quite garner a cult following.
Not quite, no.
You know, would you say that's its status is deserved?
Well, I'll say I liked it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
it's a very strange film. Like it's classified in a lot of places as a slasher film. Yeah. Wikipedia has it here as a slasher film.
I'm guessing you would contest that. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it has that element, and like, you know, in terms of some of its like iconography, the gloves and the mask and all that kind of stuff. It's reminiscent of the Giallo films that were coming out of Italy at the time, and it kind of anticipates the American Giallos, like Irvin Kershner's Eyes of Laura Mars, that was written by John Carpenter, or Brian De Palma's Dress to Kill. And these were like in late 70s, early 80s. Yeah, and they're often lumped in together with the teen slasher films, even though they're quite different. You know, the characters are older. They're usually set in like urban settings as opposed to kind of remote settings for the slasher films, or suburban settings. But I don't know. The director Alfred Soule claimed to have never seen any of the Giallo films when he made this. Right. You know, which is conceivable. Like this was developed in like the early to mid 70s. Yeah. And his conscious inspiration was actually Don't Look Now.
Yeah, well, he began to write a script the year after Don't Look Now's premiere, and I guess the most obvious reference point is the fact that Alice, the prime suspect for the killings, wears a primary colour raincoat, in this case yellow, which is a conscious throwback to the red raincoat worn at the end of Don't Look Now by somebody who I will not reveal for our many listeners who may have not seen that film.
The little girl is seen throughout the course of the film in the red raincoat. Yeah.
In this, what's interesting is that Soule sets the film in Pattison, New Jersey, at the very beginning of the 1960s. He was born and grew up in Pattison, New Jersey, so presumably there's a personal attachment to something that was going on at that time, and the film then attempts to sort of reinterpret that period in his life, I guess, and the social fabric of Pattison at the time. Yeah. I'm always intrigued by films that are period films, but not by much, if you know what I mean. So like, like setting a film 10 years prior to when you're writing it or when you're making it. It's not as if like it's like set in the Civil War or something like that. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting to me. I mean, my familiarity with Pattison, New Jersey, is as detailed or is as deep as my attachment to Jim Jarmusch's Pattison. I've not seen.
Okay.
I don't know the place.
I thought you were dissing it there. It's a good film.
So like, I can't really comment on it as a period portrayal of this place. I will say that it's, for me, a kind of a compelling reading of the Catholic Church. I mentioned at the beginning of the episode that it's a religious horror. That was my term.
I agree. Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess it's also in the wake of something like The Exorcist as well.
I guess so,
that we could sort of place this or position this as a film.
I mean, it kind of begins as it doesn't initially feel like a Giallo. It feels like an evil child movie, like a character study of an evil child, kind of maybe in the vein of like The Bad Seed, or I think The Other came out, or would have come out before this. Not The Omen though. The Omen was the same year, but then it kind of gestures at Giallo with the masks and the gloves and the knives and the kind of. I wouldn't quite call them operatic in this sense, but the kind of elaborate murder sequences.
I think they feel elaborate and sort of they feel elaborate and predetermined by the fact that we're led to believe that the killer herself is like this child. Yeah. So, which is like it seems at odds with actually what's going on. Like this child able to act in such a way, like the movement is very like. Masculine and brutal, and playing on those kinds of cliches of conventions of the
right. Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I mean that is a sort of a cliche where you'll have like in, say, for example, the first Friday the 13th, where the killer is revealed to be Mrs. Voorhees. Yeah. Whereas, like, clearly all the way through, when you're getting POV shots, it's like a man's hands and like
yeah. Before the first murder takes place, there's a moment where Alice is playing with this mask, this terrifying mask, by the way. It's terrifying because it's so minimalist. But it's so minimalist, and yet it's translucent.
It's semi-translucent, so it just kind of distorts your features. Yeah, it doesn't fully hide your face.
So you've only really got the eyes to play with as an actor.
But you can kind of see changes of expression through it as well. It's just very distorted.
Yeah. But she's playing with the mask with her sister Karen, and I haven't watched it back. I maybe should have in preparation for this as research. But she takes the mask off, and the face that we see for half a second is a man's face, though, right? It's like she's wearing another mask underneath the mask. She is. I think so. Is that what it is? Pretty sure she's wearing two masks. Okay. I might be wrong. That makes sense, but it also makes sense if it isn't, and it's just the film kind of playing with us in terms of like, you know, who's wearing it and giving us a weird vibe. But I found it up to the first and including the first murder scene, which I guess I could liken to the Godfather's baptism sequence in terms of, you know, this murder taking place in a Catholic church during a Catholic ceremony. What I found it very compelling. What I will say is that, you know, I know nothing about Alfred Soule, but his previous film was an adult film and an erotic film called Deep Sleep. He directed porn before that, in 1972, and the release of that film resulted, apparently, in obscenity charges by the state of New Jersey, and apparently a formal excommunication from the Roman Catholic Diocese of Pattison, New Jersey, which is quite a... Wait, sorry, the release of this film or the... No, the release of Deep Sleep in 1972, which is perhaps why this film is set in the 60s. Right. Maybe as a way to detach himself from the Catholic Church, but also as a kind of retroactive accusatory, like, revenge. Well, this film, Alice Sweet Alice, was confiscated and during in the early 80s in the UK during the video nasty moral panic. This was one of the films that was sort of came under fire at that time. It's pretty tame though. It's not a particularly, obviously it does thematically, it's quite dark. Obviously it deals with child murder, and it also in its, as you said, in its treatment of the Catholic Church, there's a lot of there's a lot of almost like pedophilic kind of elements to the story as well. Yeah. You know, like the way that the cops talk about Alice when she's in custody. Alice, played by Paula Shepherd, is very much, I think, sexualized in the film. I don't think the film sexualizes her, but she's sexualized by the characters. By the characters. The actor was 19 playing this role. Yeah, which is it's really, really strange. Like, she's playing what, she meant to be 12? Yeah, convincingly playing a 12-year-old. Yeah, she's looks so young. Let me ask you this though: who is the main character of this film? Ooh, well, is it? I don't know. It's a weird one, which is why I find it unusual and interesting. The film, because it introduces this father character, Dom. Who's Alice's father, played by Niles McMaster. But then before then, you've got like Catherine, her mother, played by Linda Miller, and they're separated, which I find is an interesting storytelling choice. Yeah, again, tying into the Catholic thing, and she's also like the sister and the nun who's taking care of the elderly priest. Has there's the whole thing about having a problem with. Alice and Karen's mother having become pregnant with Alice before marriage, and but the reason that I asked that is that typically these films, the main character is one of three different people. It's either the killer, and it does seem to be that's what we're going to get at the beginning of this film, that the main character is going to be Alice, and Alice is the killer, and it's going to be a character study of the killer. Yep. Or else it is the ultimately surviving victim of the killer, so the final girl, or else it's a cop character, or not necessarily a cop, but somebody filling that kind of role, like an investigative role. And in this film, we get all three points of view, but it kind of drifts from point of view to point of view, and it sort of feels a little bit unfocused and diffuse. I was going to say, do you think that's to the film's credit, or because it could potentially have been to the film's credit with a kind of a more robust directorial aesthetic, I guess. It feels a little bit kind of like it's meandering around and hopping from point of view to point of view. But we get all three. We get the killer, we get the final girl, we get the cop. I like it when the detectives say, "This kid's nuts."
What is it that the cop says about he reached across her? Oh no! When he was putting the lie detector on her around her chest, she says she looked at me like she wanted me to feel her up or something like that.
Yeah.
It's really weird. Like I was really taken aback by that line.
Yeah, as I said, like it's the film doesn't. The director's not sexualizing the actress, but it's very much about the institutional framework in which this kid is both suspected and sexualized to begin with, like simultaneously rather, and the means by which she falls under suspicion.
Yeah.
Not only are we also led to believe that she's like murdering these people, but the means by which she falls under suspicion is also rooted in a culture that also sexualizes her.
Mm-hmm. I completely thought that I was totally on board with, okay, this is a character study of an evil child, a child killer, or a child killer, who, that's what this film is. But then at the 70-minute mark, it's revealed that it's not Alice, because Alice is put into an institution where she's being watched, and then another murder takes place. Yeah, and you realize, okay, well, obviously it's not Alice. Yeah, Alice has been saying that it's actually Karen, who at that point is dead. Yeah. But I was thinking, wait a second, we're not going to go in that direction. But the film doesn't wait around after that, because it reveals who the killer is. So spoilers for Alice Sweet Alice. It is the nun who is taking care of this elderly priest, and is carrying out what she sort of sees as the work of like the angel of death, kind of, and visiting kind of death on Catherine's family. She says her child was taken away by Saint Michael, and that she's kind of carrying on that work as well for Catherine, taking away her child for her sins.
I mean, I think even before I realised, or that we're told that Alice isn't the killer, I just thought Alice is just a problem child. She's not like an evil child. She's like, all of her actions seem to be, and even like all of her actions, including the killings, seem to be an attention-seeking strategy, right? That's what we're sort of led to believe. Like, she's just a spoiled little brat.
But like when
I say
when she...
spoiled little brat, let me just retract that statement, because actually there is sort of parental negligence there. She is discarded in favour of her sister Karen, played by the way by Brooke Shields, whose first screen role this was. Yeah. And this, you mentioned that it was re-released, this film, as Holy Terror. I think part of the reason to re-release it was in the aftermath of Pretty Baby, the Louis Malle film, in which she's like primarily well known, or most well known. So I was just like, I didn't really think it was particularly like a film about like an evil child. I think like the evil is very much, there's a rationale behind why she's doing what she's doing, if she's doing it. I mean, we know that by the end of the film she isn't, but which is why I kind of guess it's an interesting, intriguing film for me, because it's about the social textures around the murders rather than the murders themselves. I agree. And okay, it's a cheap kind of switch and bait, if you like, but it does have some standout moments. The scene in which Dom, the father, is dispatched, I thought it's the closest the film comes to the "Don't Look Now" moment, which is very good, I thought. And actually all the scenes with the landlord, I think, are great. And his death scene is really, really good. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think it works that well as either horror or thriller, but as a kind of as you said, kind of like an iconographic exploration of institutional dysfunction. Of like the themes of like kind of sin and hypocrisy and trauma and indoctrination. Because at the end of the film, during the communion scene, the police now suspect Mrs. Trudoni, who is the killer, and they want to come in and take her away, but the priest believes that he can kind of extricate her from the communion scene, that she'll listen to him. Because she has such respect for the authority of the church, but also to preserve the image of the church. Of course. He doesn't want a scene there. And he doesn't want any sort of like, he thinks maybe that she could lash out at somebody else, but that she would never lash out at him. But ultimately she does, because she now sees him as sinning against God and whatever, stabs him in the neck in the middle of the church, and we see
Alice picking up the bloody knife and taking it, and like she actually is gonna become a killer now. You know, so you have this kind of like indoctrination and trauma, and you know,
it's actually a film that I think lends itself, or would lend itself very well to a remake with a more focused approach, and or maybe not even a more, well, just a better handling of the dual strands that this film attempts to incorporate. Yeah. Okay, I mean, I don't have any much else to say about Alice, Sweet Alice. Do you, Bobby?
No, that's about it.
Okay,
it wasn't quite what I was expecting, but it was interesting.
Yeah. Let's leave the 70s behind for this episode and go straight, cut forward to
the good
1998 to the good stuff, Deep Rising.
What the hell are these goddamn things?
I'm beginning to fear that our friends here may be some kind of strange offshoot of the archaeo Otoya family.
The Otoya family. And to think I was starting to worry.
At 4,000 feet, the Otoya are about as long as a pencil, with bodies about the size of a golf ball. But those at 20,000 feet have been found to eat full-grown sharks. At 30 or 40,000 feet. Well, you do the math.
This is not good.
Are we talking some kind of mutated sea monsters here?
Who gives a shit what they are? Just tell us how to kill these motherfuckers.
The Otoya are very crafty. They hide in burrows and they catch their victims with spiny tentacles, and then they crush them between massive jaws.
Yeah, and then they eat you, right?
No, they drink you. They drink you alive, sucking all the fluids out of a body before excreting the skeletal remains.
All right, that's it. Lesson's over. Here's the plan.
Hey, I'm still giving the orders around here, mister.
You stay here and give all the orders you want. I'm getting back up to my boat, cutting it loose, and getting the hell out of here.
Yeah, man, I second that motion.
Mind if I tag along?
Feel free.
So Deep Rising is a difficult film to synopsize, actually, because, as will become evident, there's two sort of story strands to it, or at least two, that unfold alongside each other before coming to a head. Somewhere in the South China Sea, a luxury ocean liner on its maiden voyage called the Argonautica is, traveling with many different luxurious guests aboard. Now, not far away from that, there are a bunch of mercenaries on board sort of a speedboat, I guess, driven by a smuggler who's been hired by the mercenaries to transport them to the ocean liner, which, as they're traveling towards it, is attacked by some mysterious sea creature. And so when the mercenaries arrive and board the ship, they encounter a ghost vessel whose occupants and inhabitants have disappeared. They don't know why. We do. Horror and carnage ensues.
And action and comedy.
And action and comedy. This is a film I'd seen way back when. I don't know why and I don't know when, but in the interim, all those many years have passed, and I don't know, I was under the assumption that this was like at least a film that had a cult following. It had a budget of $45 million. I didn't realize it was a massive flop, and it only made $11 million back. I don't know why. Like when I watched it, I thought, oh yeah, that's like obviously like a very good film. It's a film that I've been very fond of over the years without having rewatched it, and so I was kind of pleased when you asked me to watch it for this episode, because I know you're a fan as well.
Yeah, I've always been a fan. I saw it. I didn't see it in the cinema. I saw it on video when it first came out, and always really, really liked it. And I'm something of a Stephen Sommers apologist. Like the film he made, the film he made after this was The Mummy, which is kind of the only film he's ever made that has sort of a little bit of critical cachet. I've actually
not much.
No, it was reasonably well liked film, and it was a hit.
Right.
And I don't think I ever saw the sequel. The Mummy
Is it
Returns.
better than the Tom Cruise Mummy?
Is Stephen Sommers' 1999 Mummy? Yeah, oh god.
Trick question.
The worst film of the year. The worst film Tom Cruise has ever made.
Oof.
Yeah. But so the next one after that though was Van Helsing, which I saw in the cinema, and I actually kind of hated it at the time, and then for some reason found myself drawn back to it again and again. And I just the only thing I don't like about Van Helsing is that it's 130 minutes long. And I'm like, what kind of insanity was prevailing at Universal that running time was okayed for what is a schlocky monster mashup thing? Like, if that was like a lean, like 95 minutes, it would actually, I think, be a good film.
So what I feel about Terrence Malick and Paul Thomas Anderson with regard to, rediscovering them after many years later, you feel towards Stephen Sommers?
No, just toward Van Helsing, because he also directed the first G.I. Joe movie, which everybody hated, and I thought was kind of okay.
Was it Retaliation?
Yeah, I hated Retaliation, and everybody thought that was...
they're on the cliffs having like sword fights and stuff?
Yeah, that was the only part of it that I thought was okay, but I thought the rest of it was just like a dull, militaristic kind of shoot-'em-up thing that I didn't like at all. And the other one, the first one, everybody preferred Retaliation to the first one. I thought the first one had more of a sense of like a comic book kind of schlocky style to it.
Right.
Was more entertaining. Anyway, but no, Deep Rising is certainly... for even people who hate him tend to give Deep Rising a pass.
Yeah.
Like it has developed something of a cult following.
Okay.
And justifiably so. I think it's a fun film. It's a shameless like Aliens. I wouldn't even calling it a cash-in's a little bit inaccurate, considering
it is a cash-in, but of a different James Cameron film, Titanic, because
because Titanic, like this only came out like a couple of weeks after Titanic.
Yeah, well, Titanic's 97 though.
Titanic is Christmas 97.
Yeah,
this is January 98.
Yeah, but like I feel like I can imagine that with Titanic in production and being anticipated to make as much money as it eventually did, I can imagine that this film was in production alongside that in the hopes that they would be able to cash in on it. Do you not think?
Maybe. Possibly. It was. I mean, this was shot in mid 96. Yeah, possibly. Although Titanic was kind of like the sense was that it wasn't going to make any money, that it was too expensive, and it was a folly. I don't know. It could just be one of those coincidences. But it was released in January of 98. Yeah. So like actually, Forbes ran an article on the 20th anniversary of Titanic and the re-release that it's going to get. Right. I think it was Scott Mendelson wrote it. I was reading it the other day, and he was talking about like how Titanic was such a hit, and that a hit of that kind could never happen today because we have now a year-round blockbuster culture where there's a new blockbuster film opening every other week.
Yeah.
Whereas Titanic ran from Christmas 97 through to summer 98 pretty much unchallenged in that category. It was the default blockbuster every single weekend.
Yeah.
And something like Deep Rising, I was thinking about that when I was watching it. Like, aside from the sci-fi horror element of it.
Yeah.
A lot of the imagery is, reminiscent of Titanic, like flooded bulkheads and like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it might have felt a little bit like the kind of the schlocky, poor man's Titanic when it was released. So if the intention was to ride the coattails of Titanic, then I think that probably backfired.
Yeah. But it's a tremendously enjoyable film, though. Like in the vein more of, as you said, Aliens than Titanic. Ultimately, although there is romance here between Trillian, played by Famke Janssen, a beautiful, beautiful Famke Janssen. I mean, I would say that these days. I don't know. Anyway, so a few years after GoldenEye, in which she played a Bond villain, Xenia on top, and Treat Williams, who plays Finnegan, the captain of the bandits' vessel, which is going to intercept the cruise ship, and he's like a guy who's not short of one-liners. I love Treat Williams' character in this film. I love Treat Williams in this film because he's like that under-equipped tough guy, like the John McClane Die Hard thing, where like he's like the otherwise action protagonist of the film, but early on is made to be vulnerable because the bandits who he's kind of carrying towards the vessel, led by Wes Studi, are equipped with bigger and better weapons than he is. And so you got the captain's mate as well, played by Kevin J. O'Connor.
Who does Finnegan in terms of the canon of like pop culture cinema? Who does John Finnegan most remind you of?
Ooh, I don't know.
Han Solo?
Yeah, no, that's definitely.
I mean, the shot of him when the first shot that we get of him is very much like he's sitting at the
cockpit in the Millennium Falcon.
The cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. Yeah, he has his own like special little kind of quirky
it's
boat.
True. Yeah, no, it's very true.
Which is and actually, the first choice for the role was Harrison Ford. And when Ford passed on the role, they cut the budget significantly.
Very different film. Like, I don't know, Ford's like 90s output is in a very different vein to this film. Like Air Force One, like stuff like that. Like where like Patriot Games, where there's like a veneer of like political seriousness to it all. Like even though it's like action and schlocky, but like I can't imagine Harrison Ford in this role, or at least as effective as Treat Williams is. I love Treat Williams in this film. When I first saw this film, it must have been at the onset of 24, the TV series, and that's in the peak of that show, like very early on. And I was in love with that show. I watched this, and I wanted to write a feature script based on Antonioni's The Passenger, in which Treat Williams plays somebody who steals Kiefer Sutherland's identity. I don't know why, but that's what I felt like. I mean, they look nothing like each other, but I thought that was like, those were my two favourite actors at the time.
Treat Williams isn't in 24, is he?
No, but Treat Williams. No, but I'm saying I watched Deep Rising, enjoyed it, and because of that,
I see. Okay, all right.
I wanted to work on a film in which Treat Williams and Kiefer Sutherland were both the protagonists.
Jack Bauer meets John Finnegan. Jack Bauer versus Finnegan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I do wonder, because we're going to talk about the visual effects, I'm sure, but Summers initially wanted to use mostly practical effects,
right?
And I haven't been able to connect these dots, but like I know that the budget was cut because they cast Treat Williams instead of Harrison Ford, and the choice to go with CGI over practical effects was dictated by the budget. So I'm wondering if Harrison Ford had taken the role, would we have got a film with mostly animatronics with a few? They were only going to use CGI for a lot of the shots that had a lot of movement, like the very kinetic shots, and also the wide shots of the monster at the end.
Yeah.
But they were going to go with they had animatronic tentacles built and everything, and they were going to go with that instead. Yeah.
I love the effects. I love the effects, and I love the monster, like this giant squid. I guess it's a squid, right? Like a mutated giant.
We'll talk about that.
Oh, really? You don't like it?
I've always been actually. Let's just get into it now, I suppose. I've always been confused as to whether there are many creatures or one creature. Now, I think officially the official stance is that there is one.
Yeah, there's one. I think
fans have dubbed it the Octolus.
Right.
Right. It was called Krusty, I think, by the production crew. They called it Krusty as in crustacean, but anyway.
Oh, right. Yeah, I was going to say it's not very crusty.
Right.
It's more slimy.
So, I don't know. It always felt to me like there were two conflicting ideas, like as though one writer had written a story about sea serpents.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then a second writer had taken a pass at the script and introduced like a twist at the end where it's like, oh, they weren't sea serpents. They weren't like these kind of giant worms.
Mm.
They're actually the tentacles of this one creature.
Mm.
As though maybe like, I don't know, like it was introduced as a twist and that it wasn't fully worked through from the original concept, or the second writer misunderstood the original writer's concept. I actually don't think that's the case at all. I think this is always the idea. But it's the way the twist is delivered at the end,
right,
where we don't actually see the characters realizing, because all the way through the film, the characters are referred, or the creatures are referred to in the plural.
Right.
All the way through.
Right. And you think there should be more should be made of that reveal to the characters.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. It feels like a very bungled kind of twist.
It does feel a bit like Final Boss video game-esque, where you've shot at a lot of these little critters and killed them, and then this is the mother that's been giving birth to them.
Yeah, and actually, there are a lot of POV shots of it feels like they're hoping that this would be popular enough to spawn a kind of like a House of the Dead style arcade spin-off, where we're getting a lot of like character POVs with those unnecessarily elaborate, cool minigun things that they have.
Yeah.
And the creatures are lunging at the camera and they're shooting them, and like it looks like a video game.
Yeah.
Or it looks like a sort of a they're hoping for a video game spin-off. But like, so the only actual piece of exposition that we get about the creatures comes from the owner of the ship, played by Anthony Heald, a wonderful villain as he normally plays.
Can I just say before you go any further, not to deflate the whole thing with a joke every time, but I was watching this and I'm thinking, wow, this came out the same year as The Thin Red Line, and like Nick Nolte sounds completely different than he did in that film, and then I didn't realise that it's actually Anthony Heald. Honestly, I thought it was Nick Nolte until like halfway through the film, and I had to look.
I don't really see the.
You don't see it?
Nah.
Wow, I was like, Jesus. Anyways,
anyway, yeah. All right, sorry. But he's the character. He's the owner of the ship. Who. Right, so
it turns out to be the person who's hired the bandits.
So he's for some reason. Okay, so like the premise is that his dream his whole life is that like has been to build this the greatest. Or this is at least what he says to the passengers. That his dream was to build the most luxurious pleasure liner ever known to man, and but it turns out that it can't. It's not sustainable, and he needs to cash in the insurance. So he hires this group of ex-military mercenaries to stage a heist of the ship and then torpedo the ship. And the idea would be, he says at one point that like he may be a criminal, but he's not a monster. That the passengers would have been safely evacuated. But he also happens to be like a marine biologist, expert in marine biology. Also some sort of like a cryptozoologist as well. He's talking about like, because the only piece of exposition that we get in this movie comes from him, and it's like they reached a point in the script where they didn't have any characters left who might feasibly
who might
deliver this piece of exposition. Like who's going to be the cryptozoologist here to speculate about the origin of these weird creatures. So he says that they are probably a strange offshoot of what he calls the Archaea Otoya family. Now
that's right.
The Otoya, it's an extinct species of carnivorous worm. Okay,
which you found out. He doesn't tell us this.
If you Google Otoya, right?
Okay.
Archaea just means old, so that's just the name the filmmakers came up with. So the Archaea Otoya, these are an extinct species of carnivorous worm that, like, you look up the artist's rendition of this, or artist's depiction of this on Wikipedia.
I'm not sure if I want to. At the time of recording, it's quite late at night. I don't want to look at that kind of thing.
No, it's not a scary picture.
Oh, really? Okay. I hate snakes and I hate underwater things, and okay, we'll get onto that in a minute.
Anyway, so he says, so this is the only piece of exposition about these creatures that we get. Okay, so he says that they catch their victims with spiny tentacles, then crush them between massive claws.
Yeah.
He says they're as long as a pencil. At 4,000 feet, he says they're as long as a pencil, with bodies about the size of a golf ball. Okay, and on the poster, the spiel is at 4,000 feet they roam harmlessly, unseen by human eyes. At 20,000 feet they have been known to eat full-grown sharks. When those at 40,000 feet rise from the deep, it's deep rising.
That was on the poster. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Right.
So I thought it was just Full Scream Ahead. I thought that was the
Full Scream Ahead was the shorter one. Yeah. But he actually says that as well. He says that at 20,000 feet they've been known to eat full-grown sharks, and then at 40,000 feet, well, you do the math, I think is what he says. So he's speculating that that's what these things are. Now, so he's saying Archaea Otoya, and this is the reason that I feel like it's two ideas that, like, one, I don't know, this probably isn't the case, but it feels to me like two writers, and one of them didn't, like, the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. Because why call them the Otoya if the Otoya are worms? And these creatures look like worms. They look like serpents or worms. They have, but then when you describe them as being about as long as a pencil with bodies about the size of a golf ball, that suggests like a cephalopod. It suggests like an octopus shape with a body the size of a golf ball, and then the tentacles being the length of a pencil. Yeah. And he does say spiny tentacles. Like what is being like suggested here? Like if they're and I mean, when are we supposed to? That's the question. My question is: are we supposed to think that they are worms, or that they are some sort of cephalopods? Because we are definitely supposed to think that there's a plurality of creatures, because they refer to them in the plural all the way through the film.
I mean, you have to wonder if it is as big as it is at the end, and there's only one of them. Like how do you account for those scenes in like just like really narrow corridors where it's like following them along under the corridor, and then they get into a different room at the end of the corridor, and it's not able to go like under that room, like
so if
maybe the tentacles are like creatures in themselves though, and it's just like like Mr. Tickle the Mr. Men character, where they're just able to like navigate through all these different
that's the premises. Thing, it's like that's because ultimately if you take the reveal at the end of the film as being as being like a twist, that like everything that we've seen up to this point, they were just the tentacles of this one creature, then that is what you have to assume, that the creature is just sitting in the whatever that place is, like the cargo hold or whatever, and sitting there and like just reaching through every little corridor and duct and Even there's even a scene at the beginning when the passengers are attacked where someone is sucked down a toilet.
Well, I was going to say, you mentioned on the previous episode arachnophobia, giving you arachnophobia. I remember when I first saw this film, and I think it coincided with watching some kind of like documentary on television about like wildlife in Australia and somebody finding like a snake inside the water in their toilet. Horrible. I remember being a bit frightened to have sit-down visits to the toilet after that for a while.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but like if there are, I think that we're definitely supposed to think that there are multiple creatures. Okay.
Right.
My question is, are we supposed to think that they are a type of worm or a type of cephalopod? Because if they're supposed to be cephalopods, we never see the golf ball part of the creature, as it were.
No.
We only ever see what would be the creature's tentacles, and that's kind of a weird choice because I don't know. Like, I think we're clearly meant to think that they're worm or serpent-like creatures.
I don't know.
And yet, on one of the quad posters for the film, okay, there is it's evoking the famous Jaws poster with the swimmer and the shark coming up.
Yeah.
And it has the ship on the surface at the top of the poster, and then it has an octopus, not the creature from the film, just like a real octopus that has suckers on its tentacles, because these tentacles don't have suckers.
Yeah. They
look like snakes or eels or something like that.
Yeah.
So. And that text about when those at 40,000 feet rise from the deep, it's deep rising, is on that poster. So, like, are we supposed to think that there are multiple giant octopuses attacking this thing? I don't know. It just, like, we're clearly supposed to think that there are multiple creatures. I don't know if we're supposed to think that they're worms or cephalopods. And if the reveal of the big creature is supposed to be a twist, I think it's a bungled and confusing delivery because we don't see the characters realizing that there's only ever been one creature. And then also, its anatomy doesn't make any sense, because, like, why does it have a mouth in its head if it eats through its tentacles? You know? I don't know. Like, it just it's very confusing. And I was reading about the concept, and the concept was that it was supposed to be a mixture of like snake and octopus. But they also hid the creature's design, because it was supposed to be, you were supposed to see where the tentacles were connected to the main body of the creature, but it was too complex of a visual effect, and they cut back. So they just I don't know.
I mean,
anyway.
I know what you mean. It's also like sort of justified by the comparatively limited means of the film, as you said, like the budget cuts and everything, where it's fright and scares by suggestion rather than actually like seeing anything. I must say, like, when it gets to the final climatic sequence, I'm not like thinking, well, hang on a minute, like I'm not trying to figure out the anatomy of the creature by that point.
I always have been like, at that point I'm like, wait, what is?
But is that because do you generally tend to invest in, if this is a creature feature, in like the actual creature? Do you think it's important?
Very much so. Yeah, it's really important when it's a sea monster. And also, I'm a little bit, I suppose, disappointed in the fact that it is an octopus type creature, because I think that the giant carnivorous worms is scarier.
So like something
is
like
a better
Anaconda.
concept. Yeah, I mean, like those creatures. I mean, the creature that you see at the end, I don't really like the design of it. You know, the head. It almost has a kind of a mammalian kind of like jaw.
Yeah, I think it's like very much in line with the kinds of games that were being made at the time. So you mentioned like the shots are very evocative of shoot 'em up video games. Like the creature here, like I'm trying to think if there's anything particular. Like when was Jet Force Gemini out? Like and stuff like Perfect Dark. Like,
it was a little bit later.
Those kinds of games, like I feel like I don't know. It doesn't really bother me that much.
It always weighed on me.
Certainly doesn't send me to Wikipedia to find out the creature that Anthony.
This time I was looking up like footage of bobbit worms and vampire squids and like all these creatures that are supposedly and the Atoya worm. But if you look up the bobbit worm, Bobbit, that's a real existing creature, and it's like its face is very similar to the design of the face of the tentacles.
Right.
By the way, the main creature designer on this film was Rob Bottin of The Thing fame.
Right. Okay.
And I think the design of the actual tentacles is great.
Yeah.
Like, they're really sinister and malevolent looking. Yeah. I just don't like the design of the actual creature at the end, and the fact that people have dubbed it the Octolus. I mean, if we're to assume that the creature is reaching all the way through all of the corridors of the ship, it's got to have more than 8 legs, right? More than 8 tentacles.
Just like 8 very, very, very long legs, though.
Spending half an hour on this. Let's move on to some of the other aspects of the film.
I thought the 6th episode was going to go in, I must say. Did you know, just to change the subject somewhat, did you know that Deep Rising made Roger Ebert's most hated list?
Really?
Yeah. But I mean, like, he's got some of the stuff there, like, is you think, all right, okay, and then some of it's just, like, daft, like, he's got other stuff on there, like Catwoman,
right.
Sour Grapes, the Steve Buscemi film. Oh, sorry, the Larry David film. The Water Boy, and then this is the snippet that he. It's not as long as the one that I read out for Rillington Place. Don't worry. But this is the snippet that he includes on the page of his most hated. The owner of the ship, Anthony Heald, makes several speeches boasting about how stable it is. It can stay level even during a raging tempest. I wonder if those speeches were inserted after the filmmakers realised how phony their special effects look. Every time we see the ship, it's absolutely immobile in the midst of churning waves. Seems like a harsh criticism.
I mean, I can hardly speak as someone who just spent 30 minutes taking apart the anatomy of the creature, but I don't know, like Roger Ebert was always a little bit weird about horror films in general.
Yeah. But it's
yeah,
weird because like this is it's set in the South China Sea. It tells us by on-screen text at the outset that it's the South China Sea has an underwater mountain range with canyons deep enough to hide the Himalayas.
Right,
we might find an underwater Shangri-La there.
And actually, the opening shot is a reference to not Jaws 2, I believe, isn't it? That opens with the POV shot of the shark.
I don't think I've seen Jaws 2.
Oh, really? It opens with 2 divers being killed. Anyway, the opening shot of this one actually evokes the unfilmed opening shot of Once Upon a Time in America, where the car was supposed to go off the bridge, and then the camera would track through the water, and you would see different, like the cars of different like time periods, and it would come back to something along those lines. Anyway, we see sunken ships from a series of different time periods,
right?
Suggesting that this creature has been feeding in this area for hundreds of years.
Once Upon a Time in America is actually, I think, only one of 2 other films I've seen Treat Williams in. The other being 10 Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead.
I wonder, was that the reason that they included it in this, was the Treat Williams connection?
Maybe. It's just like, how you were in Once Upon a Time in America. Maybe we'll do a homage to that.
We'll film the unfilmed
film.
Yeah.
But he's great. He's so terrific, and he's supported by a host of great character actors. So I mentioned Kevin J. O'Connor, and I'm like, oh my god, where have I seen him before? Because he's got long hair in this, and I'm like, and I had to look it up, and I was like, oh yeah, of course he plays Daniel Plainview, Daniel Day-Lewis's brother in There Will Be Blood.
Oh, does he?
Yeah. Because he's got such a distinctive face, and I mentioned by study you've got Jimon Hunsu, Jason Fleming. It's like just all these different, and they're Trevor Goddard is one, and Cliff Curtis is another.
Great cast. Great cast of character actors.
Their on-screen chemistry is funny. There's a wit to the film. I love films that begin as one thing and then end as another. I like it a lot. It's a good film.
I must say that aside from the ambiguity around the nature of the creature,
we're not going to talk about the creature anymore. Jeez.
The dialogue is my main criticism of the film. I think it's like what it's going for is, like, obviously, as we mentioned before, the template is aliens.
Mm-hmm.
The crew of mercenaries is kind of like a combination of the Marines from Aliens and the ex-military mercenaries from Die Hard 2. Their dynamic is similar to that, particularly their relationship with Wes Studi. Like the William Sadler colonel in Die Hard 2. It's very similar to that.
What about some cliffhanger as well?
Yeah.
Are they very much the
same? It comes from Aliens primarily. Like Aliens is like the kind of the original action horror.
Yeah.
And spawned a whole subgenre of films and many subgenres of video games as well.
Yeah.
I mean, let's think about how many video games wouldn't exist if it weren't for Aliens. Like the Space Marine archetype is so fundamental to video games. But I don't think the dialogue is as sharp. It's not as quotable. It's not as funny. It's not as witty. It's not. It's kind of a little bit too on the cheesy end for me sometimes.
I think Williams is able to pull it off to a degree.
Yeah, no, I'm not really talking about Treat Williams. I'm talking about the Marine or the
right.
the mercenaries.
Jason Fleming. is maybe better studied out of all. I think Trevor Goddard's
I
also
like
very good.
Jimon Hunsu, but he's dispatched quite early in a scene that makes absolutely no sense. Where
Clifton Powell
they're
as
opening.
well.
They're opening the vault,
and
he uses a key card to open the vault, and he stands there as the door opens, rubbing his hands together, saying "money, money, 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 money," and then he gets hit in the face with an axe by Anthony Heald, and dies. And they start shooting into the vault, and they kill most of the crew. Just the captain and Anthony Heald's character survive. And Anthony Heald says, "I'm so sorry. I thought it was one of those things." What, opening the door with a key card? Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of Aliens references to it, and a lot of scenes even lifted straight from Aliens, like the scene where they confront, Canton, the owner in the pantry area. It's very very much like the scene in Aliens where they confront Burke about his secret plans, and there's a scene where the creatures or the tentacles, whatever we're referring to them as, start closing all the hatches and stopping them from going the way that they want to go. And one of them says they're herding us towards the bells of the ship. And Kevin O'Connor says, "You're telling me that these things can think?" Which is like almost like word for word what Bill Paxton says when they say that the aliens have cut the power in Aliens. He says, "What do you mean they cut the power? They're animals." I mean,
you mentioned
a lot of that. Even the encounter with the big creature at the end is similar to the way that they encounter the alien queen. You know? Like you thought those aliens were scary. Well, here's an even bigger one.
And do you think the derivativeness, if I may use that without sounding pejorative, was a reason for? Did that account for the box office failure of this film? Do you think? Did people was it just like seen as and perceived as an Aliens ripoff that wasn't as good as Aliens?
I don't know. I mean, it's like 12 years later. It's hard to imagine that, you know, like it's not like one of the, because that's why I refer to it as a cash-in, and I don't really think so. I mean, like cash-ins are in the immediate wake of certain phenomena. You know, it's not like, oh, we'll cash in on a movie that came out 12 years ago. I don't know. I mean, there are probably all sorts of reasons, but I'd say Titanic is probably one of the major reasons that it opening a couple weeks later and just having a lot of the same kind of, same premise. So like a lot of again, aside from the action and aside from the gun
and the eight-legged iceberg.
Exactly. But even the creature design, Bottin's creature design is reminiscent of the Facehugger.
I get it.
And the rifles that they have are almost like the pulse rifles that they have in Aliens as well. You know, it's there's a lot of stuff in there.
So you mentioned, was it in the last episode, in a previous episode, where you asked me if I'd seen Deep Rising previously, and it was to do with setting up kind of in the final moments of the film.
Oh, it was in relation to the vetoed ending to Arachnophobia, where the birds would start landing.
That's right.
Spielberg said, "Don't do that."
Yeah, and in this film, they indulge in what you said in that episode feels like a non-serious kind of gag to end
ironic
the film
kind of
Do you think that, or do you think they were hoping that it would lead to another film? Because,
I wonder. I do think that Finnegan and that trio of characters that ends up on the island at the end, which is Kevin J. O'Connor's character, Tooch, and Famke Janssen's Trillian, and then John Finnegan. Yeah, you can see them in another film.
I can't see them in a very long film, given the creature that is running towards them in that final shot. I mean, I know they've survived and they've been under-equipped, but like that final image of the film was just like, and it's a funny image of some land creature like that's huge enough to be like moving trees on this island, moving towards them at a very fast clip. I can't imagine that they'd survive that very long.
Maybe not. Yeah. Apparently the worst visual effect, the worst effect shot in the movie, which is the creature exploding when the boat explodes, was actually added after they showed the film to test audiences, and test audiences were confused as to whether the creature was killed by the explosion, so they went back and quickly added a shot of the creature exploding, which is the most video gamey shot in the movie. I must say I like the premise of the mercenaries intercepting the boat and discovering it as a ghost ship, and also when the ship is attacked, some of the lifeboats fall off and start kind of drifting away, and they plow into one of the speedboats or one of the lifeboats, which strands them, which disables their boat. You know, it's nicely kind of like well plotted, and because you could just have had the ship getting attacked.
Yeah,
you know, it could just have been like the Poseidon Adventure with a giant octopus.
I thought that. I thought that.
Without the mercenaries boarding it and boarding it's kind of the spooky kind of ghost ship, and then they do find the feeding ground of the creature as well, which is a really cool scene where they on the soundtrack you can hear the screams of the passengers as they look out over this like big kind of I guess it's like a cargo area as well.
Yeah.
Just like, you know, drenched in blood and filled with skeletons. Some great gory moments in this one, actually.
Trust you to be drawn to the one scene of expressionistic horror.
Yeah. I mean, the scene, actually, and in terms of the plotting as well, they split up when they get onto the boat because they need to, some of them want to go to the vault and some of them want to go to the engine room to get parts to fix their boat to get away. So the group is divided and some people get killed off in that scene. Jimon Hunsu gets an axe in the head. And some of the other guys get killed down in the partially flooded engine room.
No, I love that template of like.
And then you also have Trillian has been on the boat. She's one of the passengers on the boat.
Yeah, she's passed out in the storage room.
Yeah, in the galley, isn't it? And she's like. She's been arrested, basically, and she's like, you know, throw her in the brig. You can't throw a lady in the brig. Well, you, madam, are no lady. So she's a thief, or a con artist on the ship. So you have 3 different storylines, and they converge, and they all get together, and you have your actual sort of core cast of 8 characters, and they all meet together in the elevator, and then immediately the elevator malfunctions and plummets right down to the bottom floor of the ship, and when they come out, the corridor is strewn with these like. In this, what Canton describes as the excreted skeletal remains, because the creature doesn't eat you, it drinks you.
Yeah, he explains that it drinks you, which is a great image.
You. Yeah. Yes, that's another cool image is when they shoot the tentacle. It's actually the scene right after they confront Canton about the scam or the scheme, and they shoot the tentacle, and one of their party falls out of the tentacle. He's still alive, but he's being drank alive.
Yeah.
And his skin is like his flesh is being corroded by the acid, and his half of his head is missing.
Yeah, it's great.
It's very,
I love
very
all
cool.
that stuff.
You're as into the gore as I am.
I mean, yeah, you know, whatever. I mean, I much prefer like, you know, the action sequences, like Treat Williams like being a wise ass, you know, like the tough guy amongst tough men, and like his natural emergence as the leader of the ship, like that moment where, like, you know, he's like, you know, he states the plan of action, and like everyone kind of looks to Wes Studi for like approval, and Wes Studi's like, yeah, all right. But the funniest moment in the film is when they get back on board the vessel. I forget the name of it. What's it called?
The Argonautica.
No. The actual like Finnegan's boat.
I'm
sure it has a name. But anyway, they get back on, and you know, he's had equipment to get the engine going again, some kind of mechanism that'll get the engine going, and he says to Tooch, yeah, okay, I need you in the engine room. I need you to get that, you know, done. And Tooch says, okay, all I need is the stuff, and he goes, meh. And she says, sorry, what, man? William's like, yeah, I lost it. I like that exchange. I think it's very funny.
Actually, do you know what another great gory moment is? When Canton, when they start getting herded by the creature toward the feeding ground, Canton sort of he says, "Oh, you go ahead, I'll catch up with you," and then he goes off in a different direction, and his plan is to try to steal the boat that's outside. But they have rigged the boat with the torpedoes on board to take a big long arc on autopilot and then crash into the ship to try to sink the ship. And the boat starts moving just as he's about to try to make his way down to it. So he panics and jumps, and when he hits the surface of the boat, he snaps his shin bone, and his shin bone is like protruding from his leg. It's so good. I love that. I always loved that. I remember loving that when I first saw the film. And also when the captain gets eaten through the hole in the walkway, and like his leg is breaking upwards as he's getting pulled down through the hole.
Yeah.
That's great.
Lovely stuff.
Do you know what else is a great scene, actually? Although it kind of plays into I was saying I kind of wish the dialogue was better. I also kind of wish there was a little bit more of, because, you know, in Aliens, like, the character relationships that we get at the beginning, they do pay off later on.
Yeah.
Like people who were behaving cowardly, they get their kind of hero moment, and people who have a sort of an antagonistic relationship kind of resolve it, like when Vasquez and I forget the name of the other guy, the lieutenant, Gorman, he when they die in the vent together, and they like, you've always been an asshole, Gorman, and like they pull the pin on the grenade and they die together. You get those kind of moments, but like some of the characteristics introduced for the characters at the beginning of the film, like this, like the womanizer Lothario character, like what's the point of that? That goes nowhere. He doesn't, like, there's no sort of irony to it. There's no, like, doesn't really go anywhere.
This is a film in which the rug is pulled on all of the premises that it sets up. So it's kind of justified, I think.
But I was going to say that the scene where of Wes Studi's death, where he and Tooch are running away down the corridor from the tentacles, or the serpents, and Tooch is saying, we got to slow them down or whatever. And how are we going to slow them down? We got to feed them, and that's actually one of my favorite lines in the film. Is feed them what? All they got is a wet stick of gum and a breath mint. But Wes Studi's character, Hanover, he just turns and shoots Tooch in the leg, and Tooch just about gets away from the creature, and he finds Wes Studi in the room. He like reaches over the edge of the table and grabs him by the shoulder, and he turns around, and it's clear that he's in the process of being consumed by the creature. And Tooch takes pity on him and goes back and gives him the gun to shoot himself. And he says, "Don't say I never gave you nothing." Yeah. I'm like, what does that line mean? Like, that doesn't refer back to any like prior relationship that they have. It's weird. It's just like they have to have him say something.
Posted.
And then he, instead of shooting himself, he tries to shoot Tooch
with the one bullet that he has.
Well, and then he tries to shoot himself, and it's a good scene. I still really like the movie. My only issue with it is some of the dialogue, and obviously some of the visual effects are not great. So what would it be
for you? Like a high 7 out of 10?
I'd give it an 8 out of 10.
Yeah. It's an 8 out of 10 for me. Like 9 for 10.
It's a lot of fun. 10 for 10 Rillington Place.
Okay, Sweet Alice.
Give it a 7.
7 for me. And Lost Horizon.
It gets a 7.
Oh, come on, 6.
I give it a 7. I enjoyed it.
That's because you're kinder to older movies, I think.
Is it?
Maybe. I don't know.
Okay, alright, so thank you for listening to this episode of The Habitus. Please follow us on Twitter at habituspod. You can also subscribe to us now on Stitcher and TuneIn, with hopefully iTunes and YouTube coming soon. My name is Bobby Lowe. I'm here with
Michael Pattison.
And we will see you next time.
Woo, thanks. See you at Christmas.